Kira Okonkwo was 12 years old when the Dominion ships first appeared in Earth's sky. She remembered standing in the dusty street of her small Nigerian village, holding her grandmother's hand, watching the massive vessels blot out the afternoon sun. Everyone around her was screaming or praying or running, but Kira just stood there, her dark eyes fixed on the alien craft that would change everything. That was 5 years ago. Now at 17, Kira lived in a world that had been completely transformed. The Zetharian Dominion had not come to destroy humanity. They had come to rule it. Their overlord, a being called Vexar the Eternal, had declared Earth a protectorate world, subject to Dominion law and Dominion control. Humans could continue their lives, but under the watchful eyes of their new masters. Kira worked in the processing center in Lagos, one of hundreds of facilities where humans sorted materials for shipment to Dominion worlds. It was hard work, but it kept her family fed. Her grandmother had passed 2 years after the arrival, and now Kira was alone except for her younger brother Adiz, who was only 10. The Zetharians were tall beings, standing nearly 3 meters high with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. Their faces were almost human in shape, but their eyes were completely black like pools of dark water. They spoke through translators implanted in their throats, their voices coming out flat and mechanical. Most humans feared them. Kira had learned to hate them. On the day everything changed, Kira was walking home from her shift when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the central plaza, where the Dominion had built a towering statue of Overlord Vexar. Kira pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. A young boy stood before 3 Zetharian soldiers. The boy was clutching a small piece of bread, his thin frame shaking with fear. One of the soldiers was pointing at him, speaking in their harsh language. The translator caught up a moment later. This human child has stolen from a Dominion supply vessel. The punishment is 30 cycles in the labor camps. 30 cycles, nearly 3 Earth years, for a piece of bread. Kira felt her blood go cold. The boy could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He would not survive the labor camps. Everyone knew that. The crowd murmured but did nothing. They never did anything. 5 years of occupation had taught humanity that resistance meant death. Kira looked around at the bowed heads and averted eyes. Something inside her began to burn. Before she knew what she was doing, Kira stepped forward. "Wait," she said. Her voice was small at first, swallowed by the noise of the crowd. She cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Wait." The soldiers turned to look at her. Their black eyes showed no emotion. "This human speaks," one of them said. "This human speaks," Kira confirmed, stepping closer. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "That boy is hungry. He stole bread because he is hungry. Is that a crime worthy of death?" "Death," the soldier tilted its head. "The punishment is labor, not death." "For a child that young, labor is death. You know this. Everyone knows this." Kira's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Your laws are meant for soldiers and criminals, not for hungry children." The crowd had gone completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. The soldier who had been speaking stepped toward Kira, its 4 arms hanging loose at its sides. "You question Dominion law." "I question injustice," Kira replied. "Is that not allowed?" For a long moment nothing happened. Then the soldier made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are brave, human, or perhaps foolish. These are often the same thing." It turned to the other soldiers. "Take her instead. The child is of no consequence." Kira felt rough hands grab her arms, but she did not struggle. She watched as the young boy ran into the crowd, disappearing into the arms of a woman who might have been his mother. That was enough. That was worth whatever came next. But what came next was not the labor camps. Instead, Kira was taken to a transport ship and flown north, across the Mediterranean Sea, across Europe, to a massive complex in what had once been Norway, the Dominion's primary command center for Earth operations. She was placed in a small room with a single window that looked out over frozen mountains. For 3 days, no one came to see her. She was given food and water, but no explanation. Kira spent those days thinking about her brother, about what would happen to him now that she was gone. She hoped the neighbors would take him in. She hoped he would be okay. On the 4th day, the door opened, and a Zetharian entered. This one was different from the soldiers. It wore robes instead of armor, and its movements were slower, more deliberate. It studied Kira for a long moment before speaking. "I am Counselor Threx," it said. "I serve the Overlord directly. Your actions in Lagos have been reported to the highest levels of the Dominion." Kira said nothing. She was not sure what to say. "You spoke against our soldiers. You questioned our laws. In 5 years of occupation, very few humans have done this. Most who have are now dead." Threx paused. "But you are still alive. Do you know why?" "Because you want something from me," Kira guessed. Threx made a sound that might have been approval. "Clever. Yes, we want something. The Overlord himself wishes to speak with you. This has never happened before. No human has ever been granted an audience with Vexar the Eternal." Kira's stomach dropped. The Overlord, the supreme ruler of the Zetharian Dominion, master of 17 conquered worlds, the being who had brought Earth to its knees with barely a thought. That Overlord wanted to speak with her, a 17-year-old girl from Lagos. "Why?" she asked. "That is for the Overlord to explain. You will be transported to the Dominion flagship tomorrow. I suggest you prepare yourself." Threx turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. Many have tried to resist us through violence. All have failed. You are the first to resist with words alone. The Overlord finds this interesting." The door closed, and Kira was alone again. She sat on her small bed and stared at the mountains through her window. Tomorrow, she would meet the most powerful being in the known galaxy. She had no idea what to expect. She had no idea if she would survive the encounter. But as she sat there, watching the snow fall on the distant peaks, Kira realized something important. She was not afraid. Whatever happened next, she had done the right thing. She had stood up when everyone else stayed silent. She had spoken when everyone else was afraid. And that, she decided, was worth everything. The Dominion flagship was called the Eternal Throne, and it was the largest vessel Kira had ever seen. It hung in orbit above Earth like a second moon, its dark hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. Smaller ships moved around it like insects, carrying supplies and personnel to and from the surface. Kira was transported aboard a shuttle that was larger than her entire apartment building back in Lagos. She sat alone in a passenger compartment, watching through a small window as Earth grew smaller behind her. She had never been off the planet before. She had never imagined she would leave this way. When the shuttle docked with the flagship, Kira was escorted through endless corridors by a squad of Zetharian guards. The ship's interior was cold and gray, with strange symbols etched into the walls that she could not read. Other Zetharians passed by, some in armor, some in robes, all of them pausing to stare at her with their dark, expressionless eyes. Finally, they reached a massive set of doors that seemed to be made of solid gold. The doors opened on their own, revealing a throne room that took Kira's breath away. The ceiling was so high she could barely see it. Columns of black stone lined the walls, and at the far end, on a throne that seemed carved from a single piece of crystal, sat Overlord Vexar. He was enormous, even by Zetharian standards. Nearly 4 meters tall, with skin that was darker than the others, almost purple in color. His 4 arms rested on the arms of his throne, each one adorned with golden bands. His eyes were the same solid black as all Zetharians, but there was something behind them, something that seemed ancient and terrifying. "Come forward, human," Vexar said. His voice did not come from a translator. He spoke in perfect English, with an accent that Kira could not place. "Let me see the child who dares to question the Dominion." Kira walked across the throne room, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She stopped at a respectful distance from the throne and looked up at the Overlord. She was terrified, but she refused to let it show. "You are younger than I expected," Vexar observed, "and smaller. The reports described someone much more impressive." "I am what I am," Kira replied. "I cannot change my age or my size." "No, but you can change other things." Vexar leaned forward on his throne. "You challenged my soldiers, you questioned my laws. In 17 years of ruling this galaxy, no subject has ever done this in such a public manner. Most simply accept their place in the order of things. But not you. Why?" Kira thought carefully before answering. "Because the order of things was wrong. That boy did not deserve to die for stealing bread. Your law would have killed an innocent child. I could not allow that." "Could not allow it?" Vexar's voice carried a hint of amusement. "You speak as if you had any power to prevent it. You are a child yourself. You have no weapons, no army, no authority. What could you possibly do?" "I could speak," Kira said simply. "I could use my voice. That is all I had, so that is what I used." Vexar was silent for a long moment. Then he rose from his throne, his massive form unfolding like a mountain coming to life. He descended the steps toward Kira, each footfall making the floor vibrate. When he stood before her, she had to crane her neck back just to see his face. "I have conquered 17 worlds," he said quietly. "I have broken armies and shattered nations. I have ruled over trillions of beings for centuries, and in all that time I have never encountered a species quite like yours." "What do you mean?" Kira asked. "Every other species we have conquered has either fought back with weapons or surrendered completely. The fighters die quickly. The cowards survive but lose everything that made them who they were. But humans," Vexar shook his head slowly, "humans do something different. They bend but do not break. They endure. They wait. And occasionally one of them stands up and speaks as you did." "Is that why you wanted to see me?" Kira asked. "Because I spoke?" "Partly." Vexar turned and walked toward a large window that looked out over the stars. "The Dominion is old, human, very old, and like all old things it has begun to decay. My counselors plot against each other. My generals wage secret wars. My subjects grow restless on 100 worlds. I have held this empire together through fear and force, but fear and force are not enough anymore." He turned back to face her. "I need something new, something that my enemies do not expect. And when I heard about a human child who stood alone against my soldiers with nothing but words, I thought perhaps I had found it." "What do you want from me?" Kira asked, her confusion growing. "I want you to speak for your people," Vexar said. "Not as a slave or a servant, but as a voice. The humans have been silent for 5 years. I want to hear what they have to say, and I want my empire to hear it too." Kira stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You want me to represent humanity, to the entire Dominion?" "Yes." "Why would you do this? Why give us a voice when you could simply keep us silent?" Vexar made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Because silence breeds resentment, and resentment breeds rebellion. I have seen it happen on other worlds. Better to let the fire burn in the open where I can see it, than to let it smolder in the darkness until it consumes everything." "And what if my voice turns that fire into an inferno?" Kira asked quietly. Vexar smiled, a strange expression on his alien face. "Then perhaps humanity deserves to be free. We shall see which is stronger, child, your words or my empire." He gestured to one of the guards. "Take her to the diplomatic quarters. Assign her tutors to teach her our language and customs. She will speak at the Grand Assembly in 3 months' time. Let the galaxy see what humans are made of." As the guards led her away, Kira looked back at the Overlord. He was standing at the window again, staring out at the stars. She realized then that despite all his power, despite his centuries of rule, he was tired, perhaps even afraid. And she realized something else too. For the first time since the invasion, humanity had a chance, a real chance. not to fight back with weapons or armies, but with something far more powerful. The truth. 3 months passed faster than Kira could have imagined. She lived in a suite of rooms aboard the Eternal Throne that was larger than any building she had known on Earth. She had servants who brought her food and clothes. She had tutors who taught her the Zetharian language, their history, their customs, their laws. But most importantly, she had access to information. The Dominion's vast database was open to her, and she spent every free moment learning everything she could about the empire that ruled over humanity. She learned about the 17 conquered worlds. She learned about the species that had been destroyed, and the ones that still survived under Dominion control. She learned about the political factions that fought for power in the shadows of Vexar's rule. And she learned something that surprised her most of all. The Dominion was not universally cruel. On many worlds, the conquered species lived in relative peace. They had rights. They had representation in local councils. They were treated as subjects, not slaves. But Earth was different. Earth had been classified as a Level 5 protectorate, the lowest category. Level 5 meant minimal rights. Level 5 meant forced labor. Level 5 meant that humans were considered barely worth governing at all. When Kira asked Counselor Threx about this, he seemed uncomfortable. The classification was made by the Conquest Council based on initial assessments, he explained. Your species was deemed to be too primitive and too violent for higher status. Too primitive? Kira could not hide her anger. We had been to space. We had built cities that touched the sky. We had art and music and literature that had existed for thousands of years. How is that primitive? It is not about your achievements, Threx said carefully. It is about your nature. When we arrived, your species was engaged in countless wars. You had weapons that could destroy entire cities. You had been killing each other for your entire history. The Council saw this and concluded that humans could not be trusted with greater freedom. Kira sat in silence, processing this information. She wanted to argue, but she knew there was truth in what Threx said. Humanity had been violent. Humanity had made terrible choices, but did that mean they deserved to be treated as less than others forever? Can the classification be changed? She asked finally. Threx looked at her for a long moment. In theory, yes. The Grand Assembly has the power to reclassify any world if there is sufficient cause, but in practice, it has never happened. Once a species is classified, they remain that way. Until now, Kira said quietly. The Grand Assembly was held in a massive station at the center of Dominion space. Representatives from every conquered world gathered there, along with the Overlords' advisors and the highest-ranking officers of the military. It was the most important political event in the galaxy, and it was where Kira would speak. The journey took 2 weeks, even traveling at speeds that Kira could not comprehend. She spent most of that time preparing her speech, writing draft after draft, throwing them away, starting again. How could she possibly capture the hopes and dreams of 8 billion people in a single speech? How could she make beings who had never known humanity understand what they were capable of? On the night before the assembly, Kira sat alone in her quarters, staring at a blank screen. She had written 100 versions of her speech, and none of them felt right. They were all too formal, too careful, too safe. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Vexar. The Overlord entered without waiting for permission, his massive form filling the small room. He looked at the blank screen and then at Kira. "You are struggling," he observed. "I do not know what to say," Kira admitted. "I thought I did. I thought I could write something beautiful and moving that would change everyone's minds. But now that the moment is here, I realize how impossible that is." Vexar lowered himself to sit on the floor, bringing his eyes closer to her level. It was a surprisingly human gesture. "When I first conquered a world, I thought I knew exactly what I was doing," he said. "I had strategies and plans and speeches prepared. And then I stood before the conquered people and all of it seemed meaningless. Do you know what I did?" What? I spoke from my heart, not from my plans, not from my strategies. I told them the truth about why I was there and what I wanted. Some of them hated me for it, but many of them respected me because I did not try to hide behind pretty words. You are telling me to speak the truth? Kira asked. I am telling you to speak your truth. Not what you think they want to hear, not what you think will work, just the truth of who your people are and what they have suffered and what they hope for. That is all any voice can offer. He rose to leave, then paused at the door. Tomorrow, you will face beings who have ruled the stars for millennia. They will look at you and see a child from a primitive world. Prove them wrong. After he left, Kira sat for a long time thinking. Then she deleted all her drafts and began to write again. This time, she did not try to be clever or persuasive. She just wrote the truth. The next morning, she walked into the Grand Assembly Chamber and faced the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The room was vast beyond imagining, with representatives from 100 species filling the tiered seats that rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. At the center was a platform where speakers stood to address the assembly. Kira walked to that platform, her footsteps sounding impossibly loud in the sudden silence. She looked out at the sea of alien faces, each one watching her with expressions she could not read. She took a deep breath and began to speak. My name is Kira Okonkwo. I am 17 years old. I come from a small village in a country called Nigeria on a world called Earth. 5 years ago, your ships came to my sky and my life changed forever. She paused, letting her words settle. I am not a diplomat. I am not a leader. I am just a girl who spoke when everyone else was silent. And I am here today because of that silence, because my people have been silent for too long. The chamber remained quiet as Kira continued her speech. She could feel thousands of eyes on her, but she focused on the words, on the truth she had come to share. I have learned much about the Dominion in my time aboard the Overlord ship, she said. I have learned that you are not monsters. I have learned that other worlds under your rule have rights, representation, dignity. But Earth has none of these things. My people work in labor camps. My people starve while food is shipped to other worlds. My people are classified as level 5, the lowest of the low, because centuries ago you looked at us and saw only our violence. She let that sink in before continuing. You were not wrong. Humanity has been violent. We have fought wars that destroyed cities and killed millions. We have done terrible things to each other and to our world. I will not stand here and pretend otherwise. That would be a lie, and I did not come here to lie. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some representatives shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward, curious. But here is another truth, Kira said, her voice growing stronger. We have also loved. We have created art that makes hearts weep with joy. We have written music that speaks to the soul. We have built wonders and dreamed dreams and reached for the stars long before we had the power to touch them. For every war in our history, there is a story of peace. For every act of cruelty, there is an act of kindness. We are not just our worst moments. We are also our best. She looked directly at Vexar, who sat on an elevated platform above the assembly. His expression was unreadable, but she thought she saw something in his dark eyes. Interest, perhaps, or hope. You conquered us because you feared what we might become, Kira continued. I understand that fear, but fear is not justice, and classification is not destiny. You look at us and see primitives, savages, beings who cannot be trusted. But what you see is not what we are. What you see is what we were. And what we will become is something none of us can predict. She paused, gathering herself for what came next. 3 months ago, I stood in a plaza in my city and watched soldiers prepare to condemn a hungry child to death. I spoke up because I could not stay silent. I had nothing but my voice. No weapons, no power, no authority, just words. And those words brought me here to stand before you, the rulers of a galaxy. Do you know what that tells me? She looked around the chamber. It tells me that words matter. It tells me that one voice can change things. and it tells me that perhaps you are not as certain of your superiority as you pretend to be." The murmur grew louder. Several representatives were speaking to each other in hushed tones. Kira pressed on. "I'm not asking you to free us. Not today. I know that is too much to ask, but I am asking you to see us. Really see us. Not as primitives or savages or level 5 subjects, but as beings who are learning, growing, becoming something new. Give us the chance to prove that we can be more than our past. Give us the chance to show you what humanity can become when given the opportunity to rise instead of being forced to bow." She took a deep breath. "My grandmother used to tell me a story. She said that when the night is darkest, that is when the stars shine brightest. For 5 years my people have lived in darkness, but we have not stopped shining. We have not stopped hopping, and we will not stop speaking, even if our voices tremble, even if we are afraid. I am Kira Okonkwo. I am 17 years old, and I speak for 8 billion human beings who have never had a voice. Thank you for listening." She stepped back from the platform. For a long moment there was complete silence. Then from somewhere in the vast chamber, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another, and another. The sound grew until it filled the entire room, a wave of applause that seemed to shake the very walls. Not all were applauding. Kira could see many faces that remained hard and unmoved, but enough were moved. Enough had heard her words and been touched by them. Vexar rose from his seat. The applause died instantly. "The human has spoken," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Now the assembly will debate. Earth's classification will be reviewed." The debate lasted for 3 days. Kira was not allowed to participate, but she watched from a gallery above the main floor. Representative after representative rose to speak. Some argued that humans were too dangerous to be given any more freedom. Others argued that the current classification was unjust and that humanity deserved a chance to prove itself. What surprised Kira most was how many species supported humanity. Representatives from worlds that had once been classified as level 5 themselves spoke about their own journeys to higher status. They spoke about how the Dominion had given them a chance and how they had risen to meet it. They argued that Earth deserved the same opportunity. On the 4th day, the vote was held. Kira watched from her gallery, her heart pounding, as each representative cast their decision. The numbers appeared on a massive screen at the front of the chamber, climbing higher and higher. When the final vote was tallied, Kira could not believe what she was seeing. By a margin of 63%, the Assembly had voted to reclassify Earth from Level 5 to Level 3. Level 3 meant rights. Level 3 meant representation. Level 3 meant that humans would no longer be worked to death in labor camps. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was a beginning. Kira stood in her gallery, tears streaming down her face as the assembly erupted in noise below her. She had done it. Not alone, never alone, but with her voice and her truth, she had changed the fate of her entire species. Later that day, Vexar summoned her to his private chambers. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You surprised them," he said. "You surprised me." "I only spoke the truth," Kira replied. "Yes, and that is precisely why it worked." He paused. "The Dominion has existed for over 1,000 years. In all that time, we have conquered and ruled through force. We believed that power was the only language that mattered, but you have shown us something different. You have shown us that words can be weapons too, and that sometimes the strongest weapon of all is the truth." "What happens now?" Kira asked. "Now you return to Earth. Your people will need leaders who understand both worlds. You will be one of them." Vexar turned to look out his window at the stars. "And I will watch. I will watch to see if humanity can live up to the promise you made today. I hope, for both our sakes, that you can." Kira returned to Earth on a Dominion transport ship, but this time she did not travel alone. Representatives from 3 other species accompanied her, diplomats who would help establish the new relationship between Earth and the Dominion. More importantly, she carried with her a document. the official decree of the Grand Assembly reclassifying humanity. When the ship landed in Lagos, there were thousands of people waiting. Word of what had happened at the assembly had spread across the planet through channels Kira did not fully understand. The people knew. They knew that a 17-year-old girl from their city had stood before the rulers of the galaxy and spoken for them, and they knew that she had won. Kira stepped off the ship and looked at the crowd. She saw faces she recognized from her neighborhood. She saw workers from the processing center. She saw children who had grown up under Dominion rule, children who had never known a world where humanity was free. And standing at the front of the crowd, holding the hand of a woman Kira did not recognize, was her brother Adiz. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him, holding him tight. He was bigger than she remembered, taller, older. 3 months was not a long time, but he had changed. They had both changed. "I watched your speech," Adiz said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "Everyone watched it. They broadcast it on every screen in the city." "Were you proud of me?" Kira asked, pulling back to look at him. "I was scared," he admitted. "I thought they would hurt you, but then you kept talking and I could see them listening and I knew you were going to be okay. You were so brave, Kira, so brave." Kira smiled through her tears. "I was terrified. The whole time I was terrified. But grandmother always said that courage is not about not being afraid. It is about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid." The months that followed were a time of change for Earth. The labor camps were closed. The processing centers were transformed into training facilities where humans could learn the skills they would need to participate in the galactic economy. Schools reopened, teaching not just human subjects but Zetharian language and Dominion history as well. Kira became one of the key figures in this transformation. Despite her age, she was appointed to the new Human Council, a body that would work alongside the Dominion administration to govern Earth. It was not an easy job. There were those who wanted to push for more, for full independence, for revenge against their conquerors. There were others who feared any change, who had learned to survive under the old system and did not trust the new one. But Kira remembered what Vexar had told her. Patience. Change comes slowly, but it comes. And with each passing month, Earth grew stronger. Human ships began to venture into space for the first time since the invasion. Human ambassadors were sent to other worlds, representing their species on the galactic stage. Human artists and musicians and writers shared their creations with beings who had never imagined such things could exist. 5 years later, on the 10th anniversary of the Dominion's arrival, Kira stood before another assembly. This one was on Earth, in a grand hall that had been built to host diplomatic gatherings. Representatives from dozens of species were present, along with thousands of humans who had gathered to witness the moment. And seated in the place of honor, his massive form somehow looking older than it had a decade ago, was Overlord Vexar. "Today," Kira said, her voice carrying through the hall, "we celebrate a journey. 10 years ago we were conquered. 5 years ago we were heard. And today we take another step forward." She held up a document, the same kind of document she had brought home from the Grand Assembly years before. "By a vote of the Grand Assembly, Earth has been reclassified from Level 3 to Level 1. We are no longer subjects of the Dominion. We are members, equal members with full rights and full representation." The hall erupted in cheers. Kira let the noise wash over her, remembering all the steps that had led to this moment. All the speeches, all the negotiations, all the small victories and setbacks that had paved the way. When the crowd quieted, Vexar rose from his seat. He walked slowly to the platform where Kira stood, his movements showing the weight of his years. He looked out at the crowd of humans and aliens gathered together, and something like a smile crossed his alien face. "When I first came to this world," he said, "I expected to find primitives. I expected to find savages who would bow or be broken. I was wrong." He turned to look at Kira. "Instead, I found beings who taught me something I had forgotten in 1,000 years of rule. I found beings who showed me that true strength is not in weapons or armies. It is in the courage to speak when all others are silent. It is in the refusal to give up hope even in the darkest times. He reached out and placed one of his 4 hands on Kira's shoulder. 10 years ago, I conquered this world. Today, I return it to its people. Not because they fought back with violence, not because they threatened or demanded, but because they spoke with courage and lived with dignity, and in doing so, they earned the respect of an empire. Kira looked up at him, at this ancient being who had ruled the stars for centuries, and she saw something she had never expected to see. Pride. He was proud of humanity, proud of what they had become. "Thank you," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Thank you," he replied, "for reminding an old conqueror that there are other ways to be strong." That night Kira walked through the streets of Lagos. The city had changed so much in 10 years. New buildings rose where ruins had once stood. People walked freely, no longer afraid of Dominion soldiers on every corner. Children played in parks, laughing and shouting in a dozen languages. Adiz walked beside her. He was 20 now, studying to become one of the first human starship captains. He would travel to distant worlds, represent humanity among the stars, carry their message of hope and resilience to beings who had never seen an Earthling. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asked. "That day in the plaza when you stood up for that boy?" Kira nodded slowly. "Every day. I think about how close I came to staying silent. I think about what would have happened if I had just looked away like everyone else." "But you did not look away." "No," she agreed, "I did not." They walked in silence for a while, passing through the old market where Kira used to buy vegetables with her grandmother. It was bustling now, filled with vendors selling goods from 100 different worlds. "Kira," Adiz said finally, "what you did changed everything, not just for us but for the whole galaxy. Other species look at humanity now and they see something different. They see what is possible when the powerless find their voice." Kira stopped and turned to face her brother. "I was just one person, Adiz, one girl with nothing but words. The change happened because millions of people believed in those words. It happened because humanity refused to give up hope, even when everything seemed lost. I was just the voice. We were the message." She looked up at the sky, at the stars that now beckoned to humanity as friends rather than conquerors. Grandmother used to say that the stars are the dreams of those who came before us. She said that one day we would reach those dreams. I think she was right. Adiz followed her gaze. "And what do you dream of now?" Kira smiled, the same smile she had given to the Grand Assembly all those years ago. "I dream of a galaxy where no child goes hungry, where no species is classified and judged by their worst moments, where courage is more powerful than fear and words are stronger than weapons. I dream of a future where beings of all kinds stand together as equals, learning from each other, growing with each other." "Is that possible?" Adiz asked. 10 years ago, was it possible for a girl from Lagos to change the fate of 8 billion people? Kira replied. "Anything is possible if we have the courage to speak. Anything is possible if we refuse to stay silent." And so humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors or slaves, but as equals, not through violence or war, but through courage and truth. And in the great histories of the galaxy, it was written that the change began not with an army or a fleet, but with a young girl who stood in a plaza and spoke when all others were silent. Courage, they learned, could alter not just politics but the very shape of the stars themselves. And that was the most human thing of all.